Welcome to Life Cycle Talks, a series of talks presenting the research front to keep you up to date with the science and application of the life cycle perspective. Today's Life Cycle Talk is, can we quantify the impact on biodiversity in LCA from food products? And we will increase our knowledge and understanding about how to account for biodiversity in LCA. And our speaker of today will talk about how to quantify the impact on biodiversity in LCA from food products. My name is Anna Wikström, and I'm happy to welcome our guest for today, Serina Ahlgren, researcher at RISE Research Institutes of Sweden. And warm welcome, Serina. Before we start, I just want to inform about some practical information. All Life Cycle Talks will be published and available on the Swedish Life Cycle Center YouTube channel, and the raise hand function will not be used in Life Cycle Talks, but you can ask questions in the Q&A. And we will pick up questions from there for the question part later on after Serina's presentation. Back to you, Serina. Serina, I'm curious, what prompted you start studying this research field?
Well, I've been working with the LCA for almost 20 years with a lot of focus on climate impact. So I think it was a logical step to widen the perspective and to see if some old truth about food and sustainability can be challenged by bringing in new perspectives.
Okay, thank you so much. And now, please, it's time for your life cycle talk.
Yes. I will start with some facts about biodiversity. So biodiversity can be defined as the variability among living organisms from all sources, including diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. And we are in the middle of a nature crisis. It is estimated that 1 million of the world's 8 million species of plants and animals are threatened with extinction. And actually, our global food system is the primary driver of biodiversity loss, with agricultural expansion accounting for 70% of the projected loss of terrestrial biodiversity, and close to 90% of the world's marine fish stocks fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted. So as LCA practitioners, we have to do our bit. And I like the saying very much, what gets measured gets managed. And I think this is where we can pitch in with our work. So can you measure biodiversity in LCA? If we look at the purple box here in the middle, we have to our left a typical value chain with some primary production, processing, retail, consumer phase, and waste treatment. So in your life cycle inventory, you gather data from your value chain on emissions, use of material, use of energy, use of land, etc. So this data is then converted to some sort of impact. And you can convert to midpoint impacts. For example, here you find global warming, eutrophication, human toxicity, ozone depletion, rare minerals, and so on. And here you can actually also put in biodiversity. But biodiversity can also be part of an endpoint impact. So under the ecosystem quality, you can also include biodiversity. So there's no right or wrong here if you want to use midpoint or endpoint, but they have their advantages and disadvantages. It can make sense to look at the final impact, some people think, at endpoint impacts, but that also has some disadvantages. For example, it has a very anthropogenic focus and brings more uncertainty to the results and can be more difficult to communicate. So looking at some biodiversity life cycle impact assessment methods and tools. So there's a lot going on at the moment, lots of LCA methods being developed at a rapid pace. The majority of new methods is on a midpoint level. The majority is land use based, meaning that the land use in your value chain is the most decisive for the results. The majority of the new methods use species loss as a metric, the so-called PDF, potentially disappeared fraction. I will tell you more about this metric in a second. And there's quite a big variability. Some of them are operational, but a lot of them are not. So it differs. There's also tools being developed, and you can categorize these into two main categories. So there are tools which work with primary observed data. For example, on farm level, there's the Cool Farm tool, the FSA-SI platform, or the so-called RISE tool. But there's also more generic tools where you feed in land use. So this is more of tools that work with biodiversity risk, you could say, like potential biodiversity impact. So there you can find, for example, the WWF biodiversity risk filter or the integrated biodiversity assessment tool. So I want to encourage you to look at the European Horizon project called Circive. It's a huge project which works with biodiversity footprinting. So you can follow them on the homepage or on social media. And there's a big review going on at the moment for looking at different methods. I think the first publication will be in January. And there's also in the scientific literature turning up reviews. So there's one example here from Damiani et al. 2023 on the critical review of methods and models for biodiversity impact assessment. So I will now move on to talk about the research project as an example of how biodiversity can be integrated in LCA. This is a research project called the Food Biodiversity Database. It's funded by Formas with a budget of 4 million kronor, with a project lead from RISE and project participant, the retail company Coop. So the aim of this project was to develop a user-friendly database that quantifies the biodiversity impact on a midpoint level of a lot of different foods. So it can serve as an equivalent to the RISE climate database for food, so they can both be used in parallel. And the database is freely available. It's a prototype, and at the end of the presentation, you will have the link so that you can create an account and get access to the data. So we encountered a lot of methodological challenges while developing this database. And the first thing I want to bring up is that we cannot be as comprehensive as when we do climate impact calculations. So if you ask yourself, how much does 1 liter of milk affect biodiversity? We can catch the boxes marked in blue here. So we can capture what happens on the dairy farm itself, feed cultivation and pasture on the farm. We can include both positive and negative impacts, and we can also get the imported feed from all over the world on a global scale. So what we could not add was, for example, the electricity production, where you can imagine that hydropower has a large impact on biodiversity. And other inputs, for example, cultivation, not cultivation, for extraction of fertilizers from mining, extraction of fossil fuel and other inputs. And also packaging, we did not include. So this doesn't mean that it's impossible to include these things, but it's just like there's no method at the moment, and yeah, you have a certain project budget, so you cannot do everything at once. So the method that we use in the biodiversity database, which is also one of the most common methods to use at the moment for biodiversity impact assessment, is developed by a research group in Switzerland, Chaudhry and Brooks, 2018. So if you look at the box to the left, you see the framework of the method. So first you have your land occupation, your inventory. So the type of land you can include as managed forest, plantation, pasture, cropland, and urban. And you can also have these land use on 3 different intensity levels: minimal, light, and intense. You then multiply the land use from your value chain with a characterization factor. And this characterization factor is based on a lot of input data on a global biodiversity database processed in a countryside model with a vulnerability for different ecosystems. You get your results as a biodiversity footprint. You can get it on taxa level, so mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and plants, but you can also get it as a taxa aggregated value. And the method works on an ecoregion level. So here you can see the world divided in different ecoregions. However, when it comes to food, we don't have that much traceability in the food chain so that we can work on ecoregion level. So therefore, we work on a country level. So the PDF. So the results you get out from this method is PDF, potentially disappeared fraction. And the results, the PDFs, they describe the potential loss of species compared to a natural reference. And the result per kilo of food that we get out is very small. So we decided to work with femto, 10 raised to minus 15 PDF, so FPDF. And so this is like the potential loss of biodiversity caused by human land use. But you can also imagine that there's some land use that actually contribute to an increased biodiversity, for example, grazing on semi-natural pasture. So in this case, the results will be expressed as negative species loss, so a minus F PDF. So let's have a quick look into how the biodiversity looks like, the biodiversity database for food looks like. So on the top, you see different food categories, 1, 2, 3. You see countries and production of method of production. So here I have an example where I chose beverage. I chose for juice and nectar. For food category 3, I choose apple juice ready to drink. And I chose Sweden and Poland, and both conventional and organic production. So then the results look something like this. So you have your FPDF per kilo of ready drink apple juice. And you have the different countries here. You have Poland and Sweden for the conventional production and for the organic production to the right. In the database, you can also click on background information to get more information about the numbers behind the calculations. Here are some more examples from the database. Here we have coffee. So this is FPDF per kilo of ground coffee beans from Brazil, Honduras, and Kenya. Here we have potatoes. You see much smaller numbers from Denmark, Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden. And in the bottom here, you have different type of conventional meat products from Sweden. So beef, as you can see here, on the minus side. So this is beef from grazing on semi-natural pastures. You have some sort of conventional beef production, chicken, lamb, and pork. We have quite a limited number of animal products because it takes a lot of manual work when you do this LCA of animal products, as I'm sure you're aware of. So we need to find a lot of data on the feed production and so on. So we only had time to do include some animal products. But when it comes to crops, we are pretty much covered. So everything that has a yield in FOStat, you will find in the database. Here's just an example from Mexico. So luckily enough, we got some more funding from Formas. So this month we're starting up phase 2 with a continued development. So we will add some more food items. We will develop methods to capture more biodiversity affecting processes. So if you think about the milk example I had in the beginning, so fill in some more blue boxes. We will look at the organic production a bit in a bit more, to get a bit of representation of organic production. We will try to translate this FPDF to some sort of biodiversity equivalence or score, because it's not very communicative with this FPDF. And lots of other things. So basically just continue the development. And this follow project is Rise Again, Coop, and Compass Group also. Yes, so some conclusions from my short talk here. So the question, if we can quantify effects on biodiversity, I would say yes. we can do that now. However, we are in a phase of rapid development of methods, and there's still some research gaps, but it's a very interesting time to be a researcher in this field. As I said, there are so many different methods showing up at the moment, so at some point we will need to harmonize these methods. That's something we will have to do in the coming years. I think another key question is the communication and interpretation of results. It's difficult to know what is small, what is big. Yeah, for climate impact, for example, we have a much better feeling nowadays because we worked so many years with the LCA impact in that field. So we need to work more with that. And a good thing to get more knowledge is to work on case studies, and the number of case studies are actually increasing. So we learn as we go. Just some short last words about biodiversity at RISE. So we're a group of people working with biodiversity, both agriculture and marine environments. And I want to give special thanks to my colleagues here you see on the picture to the right, which have been very involved in the development of the biodiversity database. It's Karin Morell and Victor Lundmark.
Thank you so much, Serina, for a great presentation. Now it's time for questions. So if you have any questions to Serina, please use the Q&A function. I will start with some questions and then I will pick up some questions from the Q&A. Yes. So you mentioned there are many methods available for including biodiversity in LCA, and you choose to work with Shorter and Brooks. Why is that?
Yeah, well, the Shorter and Brooks, as I said, it's been used in many case studies, and actually the UNEP-ZETAC LCA group, they've recommended it. But I think the most important thing is to use a method that actually suits your purposes. If in the biodiversity database, we needed something with global coverage and country level, so that's why we chose that method. But if you have more detailed data, you should maybe choose some other method which suits your purpose.
Okay, thank you. And in your example, Kenya coffee have 10 times higher PDF, potentially disappeared fraction, than coffee from Brazil. Does this mean that we should stop buying coffee from Kenya?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question, but ultimately it's a land use issue. And actually we have the same sort of difficulties with climate calculations, because cultivation that is intensive usually turn out well with a low climate impact and a low biodiversity impact. Intensive production means that you can also spare land for nature conservation. On the other hand, a low intensive system can also be really high in biodiversity, for example, an agroforestry system as there are in Kenya. So I would say no, don't stop buying coffee from Kenya, but it's actually the good thing about this is that we raise the issues. So by putting numbers on biodiversity, we get these kind of questions on the table.
Great, thank you so much. And now I will pick some questions from the Q&A. The first question is, thank you for a clear presentation of the impact chain. How can positive effects arise from managed systems compared to the natural state?
Depends on, of course, how you define the natural states. For Sweden, there are not so many places, maybe. I mean, it has to do with the ecosystems, right? So like imagine a rainforest in South America has been there maybe for millions of years. So it's hard to imagine something which is better than that. For Sweden, we had the Ice Age, sort of cleared everything. And after that, we build up our, there's been a human land use since then. So these systems have become very rich in biodiversity. So yeah, it's a good question, and it comes down to how you define the reference states.
Yes, thank you. We will continue with questions in the Q&A. And the next one is, what do you see as a disadvantage of using recipe method as an application in biodiversity impact assessment? It does not give the biodiversity significance assessment of the impact, but why have you chosen not to use this method or at least compare?
That's a very good question. And the recipe is an endpoint assessment. So we wanted to work with the midpoint. So that's one reason. And the recipe only works, it's the same thing as it's actually land use based. And in the coming, as I said, there's like lots of things to to choose from here when it comes to impact assessment methods. So also in the coming project that we have now for 2 years, we will try different impact assessment method, and recipe is definitely on the list.
Okay, thank you. And the next question, can you say anything about the data and assumptions you used for the reference? You mentioned it is a natural state. What does that mean in practice, and how does that impact the results?
Yeah, that's really difficult. When we started up, we really understood that the reference situation was going to be very important. But in this method and all the other methods that we looked at, the reference, you cannot change the reference situation. It's just like there and baked into the method, sort of, more or less. And actually in Jordan Brooks is not really well described either. Yeah, no, I cannot say so much more about the reference state at the moment, except for like you could do it in different ways, and it's applied in different ways and different methods. Yeah, it's a very difficult question. I'm sorry, I cannot really answer that very clearly.
Okay, thank you anyway, and we will continue. Is there a comparison study between plant-based and animal-based food products to compare their impact? Or is a study of this kind planned for the near future?
No, we don't have so many plant-based products. I think we have soy mince and some pea protein. But yes, definitely it will be, and the ambition is to include more um, more food items, and we have quite a large reference group also, and they've been helping us to prioritize, and so we will get back to that prioritization list. But as far as I can remember, there's that was quite high on the list, plant-based dairy and meat alternatives. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. We'll continue. What do you think about the standardization process of models and methods going forward? What would be the best way forward?
In the sense of standardizing the biodiversity impact assessment method, I assume. Well, that is starting. These reviews are starting. That's one good thing. So just like getting an overview of the field, like what is there, what kind of methods, how do they differ, what does it mean for the result and for the interpretation of in case studies. So that work has already begun. This large European project I talked about, CIRCAV, is also a project on harmonization of methods, as well as in the PEF and in the Agricultural Working Group. I know there's also work going on reviewing and trying to look at some recommendations and things like that. So there's absolutely ongoing work. As far as in other standards, I don't know. I know there's an ISO standard being developed on biodiversity, but that's not LCA specific. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We will continue with next question. Thank you for an interesting presentation. Do you see the possibility of implementing a similar database for other industrial sectors based on what you have achieved in this project? For example, textiles and construction?
Yes, that could absolutely be possible. This was like a pilot project. You could say, like, as you hear, it's like things are really difficult to answer, like on the reference data, things like that. So what you could say is like methods are not like really robust yet, and it's really difficult to interpret the results. But you can also say like, let's go ahead and just like not wait for the perfect method. Why not just start and then improve as we go? So absolutely, I go for it.
Great. Yes, we have more questions. What are your thoughts on applying this to marine systems and products?
That's very difficult. But I have some other colleagues at work looking into this. There are a completely different question than in marine environments compared to land-based systems, where a lot has to do with exploitation of the fish stock, but also things that happen on the bottom of the sea. And I think it's more complex. But there's definitely research going on in that field.
Thank you. Next question is, today there is much discussion of biofuels, where there is a trade-off between carbon dioxide and biodiversity. How can that be analyzed if only land use is included in impact assessments?
I don't really understand that question. But it's the same with anything that you cultivate on agricultural land. So why it would be specific for biofuels, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, we can continue with the next question. What are your thoughts about direct land use change in regards of potentially higher or lower biodiversity impacts?
Yeah, good question. I'm like generally against including indirect land use change in product LCA to start with. I think it's good if you want to do more like global assessments, or no, maybe not even global, maybe national assessments. But of course, I think it would be the same as for climate impact. So more impact if you also include indirect impacts, of course.
Okay, great, thank you. We have time for last question. As a consumer, what food should I choose or avoid if I want to have a low impact on biodiversity?
Yeah, on the high impact, like what you should avoid, we have products from sensitive ecosystems, so tropical things like tropical fruits, but like palm oil, things like that. There's also some meats, coffee also, of course, we saw that on the previous picture, cocoa, and some meat also that are that take a lot of high amount of land in ecosystems that are sensitive. And on the low side, things that you should choose, you can find like fruit and vegetables from Europe, and those kind of things. So actually, it's the good thing is it has a lot to do with climate. So what generally has low climate impact also has low biodiversity impact. That's sort of a general conclusion.
Okay, great. Thank you for all the questions that you have submitted in the Q&A. Unfortunately, we can only address a portion of that, but it's great to see the significant interest in the topic. So thank you for all great questions. And thank you, Serina Ahlgren, researcher at RISE, for a great presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So let's see here. I will just share my screen again. Let's see here. Yes. So if you're interested to learn more about biodiversity in LCA, you will find more information in these selected links. and in these 3 selected publications. And all these links are available for the calendar post at the event at lifecyclecenter.se. And please feel free to contact Serina for questions, and here you can see her email address. The Life Cycle Talks are published by the Innovation Cluster for the Life Cycle Perspective and the Swedish Life Cycle Center. And to ensure you don't miss next Life Cycle Talk, follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our newsletter. And thanks for listening.